Now, a fundamental concept that we talk about in fighting for someone is to bring Jesus up regularly and early in the friendship. And that is sometimes the thing that in some ways is most intuitive to us, and yet in other ways is the most confusing at the same time. Because aren't we supposed to just kind of let Jesus come up naturally? Or isn't that kind of like baiting and switching, or kind of bringing in our agenda suddenly into the friendship? Well, only if your heart posture in it is one where you see Jesus as a task in your own life. That we should talk about what we care most about. That in a real friendship, we share the highs, the lows, the goods, the bads, the things about our life, to be authentic with one another, to be people who can lean on each other and love each other. And part of that means sharing just our life. And if Jesus is the Lord of our life, then he should come up naturally. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't also a sense of intentionality, but that's not contrary to relationship. That's saying that there's this maxim that sometimes you have to start from conscious incompetence to unconscious competence. And we breathe the air in our world that says, don't talk about Jesus, don't talk about your faith, don't bring him into this friendship of ours. And so that is our intuitive default. And it takes a sense of consciousness, conscious choice to really intentionally bring out that part of our life that is most central to who we are. And so when we're talking about bringing Jesus up regularly and early, remember that our idea here is that we are trying to talk about Jesus in a way that elevates the love that we have for him and invites people into that love relationship with him. And that means that we are trying to create a community. A small group community is a group of people around my life who are sharing in my life, and I'm sharing in theirs. And we are journeying together into a more and more meaningful relationship, which means that Jesus has to ultimately be central if that friendship is ever going to reach its potential in what relationship really can be, where we find it in the source of relationship in Christ. So we talk about bring Jesus up early and regularly, but this seems like the thing that is so counter to us, even though that's kind of the idea, hey, I'm building a small group, we're trying to pursue after Jesus together. But if you bring him up early, then it's not weird when you bring him up regularly. But if you don't bring him up early and you don't bring him up regularly, then it is a sort of a bait and switch. Hey, let's be friends, but actually I want you to, be part of this thing. And Jesus is seen in that friendship as something as other than the friendship itself. He is seen as kind of an add-on or a tag-on or some kind of ulterior objective or agenda to the relationship. But if you bring him up early and regularly, now does that mean that sometimes people won't walk away because of their lack of interest in Jesus? No, they walked away from Jesus, and they will walk away from you too. But you have to care more about their future than their friendship even. We talk about the need for us to be bold enough to share the love of Jesus with people, to be brave enough to not hide him in our lives, but to make him shine. And that means bring him up early. Well, how do I do that? Well, if it's with a Christian, of course, it's a lot easier sometimes to go there. But don't just forget to be intentional to bring him up, because just because somebody claims to be a follower of Christ doesn't mean that they don't have a lot to grow in during this season. And you want your friendship to be built upon, as C.S. Lewis says, it has to be built upon something. But we talk about when it is built upon the thing that is central to our lives, how profound the friendship can be. And so build the friendship on Jesus. If it's a friendship that isn't intuitively built on Jesus because they aren't followers of Jesus, it's okay to not have the friendship be about Jesus. That they're not there with you. But let it be about, rock climbing or the same classes that you have or what have you. But always invite Jesus into that space. Always invite him into that room. And in that way, you'll continue to push them into a greater sense of love and affinity for Jesus. I remember the first time I held an iPhone in my hand, I thought it was silly because, I could do more than what it could do on my laptop, and I could do it twice as fast, and who would spend that much money? The second time I got an iPhone, or somebody around me, a friend of mine got an iPhone, I looked, let me see that thing. I kind of played with it. Like, wow, that's actually kind of cool. I see the allure, but I'm never going to get one. I don't see why I would. But after a few other people, the more I started to interact with it, eventually I was like, man, I got to have one of these, right? And Steve Jobs was notorious for saying the consumer didn't know what they wanted. He knew what they wanted, but he was going to show them. But in some ways, there is a loving perspective of that the world doesn't know that they want Jesus. But they do. There is something in the heart of mankind that longs for its author, its creator, and its founder, and is searching for that sense of purpose and value and significance that only he gives. They just don't realize it's Christ. So if we're not inviting him in that space, how will they ever get to that place? Because their desire isn't there yet. One hint that we have often found is helpful is why community is so important. Is that we often find in those relationships, telling stories is huge, but also talking about Jesus just in front of our guys and gals, inviting them into the love relationship you have with your brothers or sisters in Chi Alpha, and talk about Jesus with them because they'll be excited with you about what you've been reading or thinking about or what the Lord is doing in your life. And those guys or gals that are in your life that aren't there yet will pick up on what you guys are saying in a less threatening context sometimes than directly having a conversation. What are your thoughts on the Trinity, right? Although there's always a place for that. It's also why small group weekly meetings are so important to have. Even though we say small group isn't a weekly meeting, it has one, but it has one for a purpose, because that space gives structure, if you will, to a conversation that sometimes isn't as organically natural in a friendship early on. But be intentional if you get them to a worship service or after small group to process with them. That's another thing. Just, hey, what did you think about what so-and-so was sharing last Wednesday night? Anything stick out to you? Anything you're wrestling with or disagree with? Anything we can talk about? But let them share, and don't always be the answer man with all the ideas. But let them process while you coach them through thoughts on faith. And ultimately, you'll draw them closer to yourself and closer to your God as they learn to draw closer to the source of all meaning, value, and purpose in their life.